So today I want to discuss something that almost nobody in the Western media is talking about. And I think the reason nobody is talking about it is because it does not fit the narrative. Right now, every cable news channel, every podcast, every think tank in Washington is focused on Iran. And I understand why. There is a war happening. It is dramatic. It is dangerous. It dominates every headline. But while the entire world stares at Iran, one country is doing something extraordinary. It is building a defense empire. It is selling weapons to 37 countries on 4 continents. It is buying European aerospace companies. It is quietly positioning itself at the center of every major trade route between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And almost nobody is paying attention. That country is Turkey. Now, I made a prediction in this class over a year ago. I said that the current conflicts in the Middle East would not weaken Turkey. I said they would strengthen it. I said that Turkey would use the chaos around it the way a skilled chess player uses a distraction to move its most important pieces into position while the opponent watches the wrong side of the board. And that prediction is coming true right now, faster than even I expected. Today, I want to tell you exactly where this is heading. I want to tell you what Turkey will look like by the end of this decade and why it matters for the entire global order. But first, let me show you why. Let me walk you through the structural logic step by step so you can see it for yourself. Because once you see what Turkey is actually doing, you cannot unsee it. So let me explain the method and then we will get into the substance. When I make predictions in this class, I do not guess. I use a framework I call predictive history. It rests on 3 pillars. The first pillar is structure. I look at the deep, slow-moving forces that shape what is possible: geography, population, economic systems, natural resources. These things do not change quickly. They set the boundaries of the game. The second pillar is incentives. In game theory, every player is trying to maximize their own interest. So I always ask, what does each player actually want? Not what they say in press conferences, what they actually want. Because those two things are almost never the same. And the gap between them is where the real story lives. The third pillar is historical pattern recognition. History does not repeat exactly, but empires are empires, rising powers are rising powers, and certain patterns appear again and again across centuries. If you know those patterns, you can see them unfolding in real time. Now let me apply this framework to Turkey, and I want to do this carefully because the conclusion I am going to reach will surprise most people, but it is logical. And once you see the evidence, it is overwhelming. Let us start by understanding what each major player actually wants, because this is where most analysis goes wrong. Analysts listen to what leaders say and they report that. I look at what leaders do and I ask why. What does the United States say it wants from Turkey? It says it wants Turkey to be a loyal NATO ally. It says it wants Turkey to support Western sanctions against Russia. It says it wants Turkey to align with American foreign policy in the Middle East, okay? Now, what does America actually want from Turkey? America wants Turkey to remain a dependent junior partner. It wants continued access to Turkish military bases, particularly in Sirlik Air Base, which is critical for operations in the Middle East. It wants Turkey to keep buying American weapon systems like the F-35, not building its own. And most importantly, it wants Turkey to stay out of the way of American and Israeli strategic objectives in the region. America does not actually want a strong, independent Turkey. It wants a useful, compliant Turkey. There is a very big difference, and Turkey figured this out. That is why in 2017, when Turkey purchased the Russian S-400 air defense system, America did not just object. It expelled Turkey from the F-35 program entirely. The message was clear. You are allowed to buy our weapons. You are not allowed to make your own choices about your defense. Turkey heard that message, and it responded not with obedience, but by accelerating its domestic defense industry at a pace nobody predicted. Now, what does Turkey say it wants? It says it wants to be a responsible NATO ally. It says it wants regional stability. It says it supports the international rules-based order. Now, what does Turkey actually want? Turkey wants to become the dominant power in the space between Europe and Asia. It wants to build a defense industry so capable that it never again has to depend on any foreign country for its own security. It wants to control the trade corridors that connect 3 continents, and it wants to be recognized not as a regional middle power, but as a global player whose partnership is courted by everyone and whose opposition is feared by everyone. Every major policy decision Turkey has made in the last decade points in this direction. Every single one. So what does Russia want from Turkey? Russia wants Turkey to remain a buffer between NATO and Russian strategic interests in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It wants Turkey to continue buying Russian natural gas, which accounts for nearly 50% of Turkey's energy imports. It wants Turkey to use the Bosporus Strait to limit NATO naval access to the Black Sea under the Montreux Convention. But Russia also fears Turkey, and here is why. Turkish drone technology, specifically the Bayraktar TB2, proved devastatingly effective against Russian-made air defense systems in Libya in 2020, in the Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020, and in the early stages of the Ukraine conflict. Russia saw its own weapons humiliated by a Turkish drone that costs a fraction of what Russia's defense systems cost. Russia treats Turkey as a partner it cannot fully trust and a rival it cannot afford to openly confront. And what do the Gulf states want? Saudi Arabia and the UAE want Turkish weapons. They are signing billions of dollars in defense contracts with Ankara. In 2023, Saudi Arabia signed a $3 billion deal for Turkish Akinci combat drones. By mid-2025, Saudi military industries had signed technology transfer agreements with 3 major Turkish defense firms to manufacture advanced land systems inside the kingdom. The Saudis are now reportedly pursuing $6 billion in additional Turkish defense agreements. Let me explain what is happening here. The Gulf states watched what happened to Libya. They watched what happened to Iraq. They see America's attention shifting. They know they cannot defend themselves alone. And they are diversifying their security partnerships as fast as they can. Turkey is their hedge against a future in which America is no longer willing or able to protect them. Okay, now I have the players and their real interests. Let me show you the structural realities, because interests tell you what people want to do. Structure tells you what they can do. And the structural facts about Turkey right now are extraordinary. I want to go through 4 of them carefully because they are the foundation of my prediction. Structural fact number 1 of 4. Turkey's defense industry has undergone the most dramatic transformation of any country in the 21st century. In the year 2000, Turkey's entire defense industry had a turnover of less than $1 billion. Total defense exports were approximately $200 million. In 2025, Turkey's defense and aerospace exports surpassed $10 billion. Let me say that again, $10 billion in a single year. In 25 years, Turkey went from a country that imported nearly all of its weapons to a country that exports more in defense products than the entire military budgets of nations like Pakistan, Denmark, Greece, and Egypt. 5 Turkish companies now rank among the world's top 100 defense manufacturers. Turkey produces 80% of its own military equipment domestically, up from roughly 20% 2 decades ago. And the company at the center of this revolution, Baykar, exported $2.2 billion in drones in 2025, making it the world's largest armed drone exporter for the 3rd consecutive year. Its combat drones now operate in 37 countries across 4 continents. A single Bayraktar TB2 system costs between $2 and $5 million. The American MQ-9 Reaper costs roughly $20 million. Turkey offers battlefield-proven technology at a quarter of the price with fewer political conditions attached. That is an extraordinary competitive advantage, and every military in the developing world knows it. Structural fact number 2 of 4. Turkey's geography is the most strategically valuable real estate on the planet. I do not say that lightly. Turkey sits on the Bosporus Strait, which controls the only maritime access between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It borders 8 countries. It sits at the literal crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Every major energy pipeline, every major trade corridor, every major military transit route between these 3 continents passes through or near Turkish territory. During the Cold War, this geography made Turkey a useful American buffer against the Soviet Union. Today, it makes Turkey something much more significant. It makes Turkey indispensable to everyone and fully dependent on no one. Here is a detail most people miss. Turkey also recently discovered the Sakarya gas field in the Black Sea. By early 2025, daily production from that field reached 8.8 million cubic meters. Turkey is beginning to reduce its energy dependence on Russia, which has been the single greatest constraint on its strategic freedom. When that constraint weakens, Turkey's ability to act independently increases dramatically. Structural fact number 3 of 4. Turkey is embedding itself inside European defense infrastructure in ways that most Western analysts have completely overlooked. In late 2024, Baykar acquired Piaggio Aerospace, a 140-year-old Italian aviation company, gaining a European production base. In mid-2025, Baykar formed a joint venture with Leonardo, Italy's largest defense company called LBA Systems, to co-develop NATO-compliant drones for the European market. Turkey signed a €3.1 billion contract with Spain to co-produce and export 30 Hurjet jet trainers and light attack aircraft. Turkey joined the NATO drone coalition based in Latvia. Turkish defense companies signed contracts and technology transfer agreements with Romania, Poland, Indonesia, Malaysia, and dozens of others. Let me explain why this matters. While European politicians debate whether to ever let Turkey into the European Union, Turkish defense companies are already inside Europe's military-industrial complex. Turkey is not waiting for a political invitation. It is making itself structurally essential to European security. And once those supply chains are established, once those joint ventures are operational, once European militaries depend on Turkish components, that integration cannot be easily reversed. That is how real power works, not through speeches, through supply chains. Structural fact number 4 of 4. The current wars are accelerating Turkey's rise, not slowing it. This is the point most people miss entirely. While America depletes interceptor stockpiles in the conflict with Iran, while Russia grinds through equipment and manpower in Ukraine, while European nations scramble to rebuild militaries they neglected for decades, Turkey is selling to all of them. It is the arms dealer in a neighborhood where everybody is fighting. Turkey's defense exports grew 29% in 2024. They broke records again in 2025 with over $10 billion. Europe alone accounted for $4.3 billion of that total. The Middle East contributed $1.6 billion. Every missile fired in the Middle East, every drone shot down over Ukraine, every interceptor depleted from Western stockpiles represents a new purchase order for a Turkish factory. And Turkey's factories, unlike America's bloated defense contractors that take 26 years to develop a single fighter jet, are lean, fast, and scalable. Baykar's drone production lines can be rebuilt even after strikes. Ammunition production capacity increased from 4,000 units to 65,000 per year, with a target of 1 million by 2028. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate national strategy executed over 20 years. So now I have the structure and the players. Let me give you the prediction. And I want to present this as 2 scenarios, because the future branches depending on one critical variable. Does the current global instability continue, or does it resolve quickly? Scenario 1, the wars continue and instability persists. Iran remains under military pressure. The Russia-Ukraine conflict grinds on. European rearmament accelerates. In this scenario, Turkey's trajectory is nearly unstoppable. Demand for Turkish weapons continues to surge. Defense exports could reach $15 to $20 billion annually within 3 to 5 years. Turkey's economy, already projected by the IMF to grow at 4.2% in 2026 with a GDP approaching $1.8 trillion, gets a massive industrial boost from its defense sector. Turkey deepens its integration into European defense supply chains. It becomes structurally a country that NATO cannot operate without. The global drone market is projected to grow 12 to 13% annually through 2030. Europe's combat drone market alone is expected to reach $19 billion by 2030. Turkey is positioned to capture a dominant share of that market because it has a 5-year head start on European competitors and a price advantage that no Western manufacturer can match. In this scenario, Turkey emerges within a decade as the most significant conventional military-industrial power between Western Europe and China. Not because it fought a great war, because everyone else was fighting wars and buying Turkish weapons to do it. Now here is scenario 2, and this contains the counterintuitive twist. A peace settlement is reached. The Iran conflict winds down. Russia and Ukraine negotiate an end. The world stabilizes. Most analysts assume this would be bad for Turkey because demand for weapons would decrease. They are wrong. A post-war Middle East will need reconstruction. A post-war Europe will need a defense industrial partner that can produce at scale and at lower cost. Turkey is positioned for both. Turkish construction companies like Enka and Rönesans are among the largest in the world. Turkish defense companies have proven affordable technology. Turkey's geography makes it the natural logistics hub for any reconstruction effort in the region. Here is the important point. Turkey wins in war and it wins in peace. The only scenario in which Turkey genuinely loses is one in which it is isolated, sanctioned, and cut off from global markets simultaneously by both the West and the East. And right now, nobody is doing that. Nobody. Because everyone needs what Turkey is selling. So here is my specific prediction. Within 5 to 10 years, Turkey will be recognized as a top 5 global defense exporter. It will function as the indispensable bridge power between NATO and the non-Western world. And it will leverage that position into political and economic influence that far exceeds what its GDP alone would suggest. The math simply does not work any other way. Now let me address the 3 big questions I know people are going to ask. Question 1. Can Turkey sustain this growth with its inflation problem? This is a legitimate and fair concern. Turkey's annual inflation peaked at roughly 75% in 2024. It remained in double digits through 2025. The central bank held interest rates at around 38%. That is painful. But here is what most Western analysts miss when they dismiss Turkey because of inflation. Turkey's defense sector is overwhelmingly export-driven. Baykar earns 88% of its revenue from foreign sales in dollars and euros, not Turkish lira. The defense industry is actually a structural hedge against Turkey's own currency weakness. It brings in hard currency, it creates high-skill, high-value employment, and the World Bank projects inflation declining to 18% by end of 2026 and 15% by 2027. Turkey's economy is not collapsing. It is going through a painful but deliberate correction, and the defense sector is the engine pulling the broader economy forward through that correction. Question 2. Will NATO actually tolerate Turkey becoming this independent and this powerful? I am confident that NATO has no choice, and here is why. Turkey controls the Bosporus Strait. Turkey has the second largest standing military in the entire NATO alliance. Turkey now produces weapons that European armies desperately need: drones, armored vehicles, naval platforms, missile systems, at prices those armies can actually afford. And with the United States openly questioning its commitment to the alliance and the American president calling NATO a paper tiger, Europe needs Turkey more than Turkey needs Europe. This is the leverage inversion that almost nobody in Washington or Brussels has fully processed. Turkey is no longer asking for a seat at the table. It is building the table. Question 3. Is this all about Erdogan, or would Turkey's rise continue without him? This is the most important long-term question. And my answer is definitive. Turkey's defense rise is now structural, not personal. The defense industry employs over 100,000 people across 3,500 companies. Export contracts extend years into the future. Joint ventures with Leonardo, with Spain, with Indonesia, with Saudi Arabia are locked in by legal agreements and industrial infrastructure. The factories are built. The client relationships are established across 37 countries. Erdogan planted the seed. He deserves credit for the strategic vision. But the tree now has its own roots, its own branches, its own momentum. Even the Turkish opposition, which is gaining political strength, has shown no interest in reversing the defense industrial strategy. Because it works. It brings in money. It creates jobs. It gives Turkey global leverage. No rational political leader would dismantle that. Let me close with one historical parallel because I think it captures exactly what we are watching unfold. In 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople, he did not just win a battle. He seized control of the single most important strategic position in the known world, the point where Europe meets Asia, where the Black Sea meets the Mediterranean. And the Ottoman Empire that followed did not become the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean by winning every fight. It became dominant by controlling trade routes, by building the most advanced military technology of its era, massive cannons and siege weapons that no European army could match, by positioning itself as the indispensable middleman between civilizations. The Venetians traded with the Ottomans even while they fought them. The French allied with the Ottomans against their fellow Christian kingdoms. Everyone dealt with the Ottomans because the Ottomans controlled something everyone needed: the space between worlds. Today, Turkey sits in that exact same geography. It controls the same straits. It builds the most relevant military technology of our era: drones instead of cannons. And it is selling to everyone, NATO members and non-NATO nations, European and African, Arab and Asian, because everyone needs what Turkey offers. The parallel is not perfect. History never repeats precisely, but the pattern is unmistakable. A rising power at the crossroads building the weapons of tomorrow while the established empires exhaust themselves in wars they cannot afford and cannot win. That is Turkey in 2026, and most of the world has not yet realized what it means. Now, I want to be clear. This is not prophecy. This is game theory. This is structural analysis applied to observable facts. I might be wrong. Turkey's economy could spiral, a domestic political crisis could erupt, the defense industry could face a technological setback. There are real risks, and I do not want to minimize them. But the structural logic, the geography, the demographics, the industrial base, the competitive pricing, the strategic positioning, all of it points in one direction. And the direction is this. While the whole world watches Iran, Turkey is quietly, methodically, and brilliantly becoming the most important country that most people are not paying attention to. And by the time the world fully notices, it may already be too late to catch up.